Okay guys, I am back with the Courthouse Step mini-series block, and we are going to start by trimming this out. So let's do that real quick. I know it seems like I'm like moving right into making the blocks, but I gotta make a couple videos before we leave. And I'm trying to get that done for you guys. Let's see. Also, just a reminder, you do not have to cut these out with your rotary cutter. If that's not something you want to do, you can always use scissors, which would be just fine. If you are making the entire block, though, you'll need to make sure that that you draw your 1/4 inch seam allowance on the outside, because they're not on this block. Okay, so here's our block. Doesn't really matter how you're going to lay it out. I guess I'll try to lay it out like they have on here. And all you need to do is reference the photo that's on the pattern, and you can lay out your fabrics accordingly, or you can change them to any kind of order that you would like to do yourself. So I know that my block number 1 is going to be one of these white blocks, and I have them already cut. I had a few of them that were already cut, so I'm going to have that one. And then 2, there are 2 2s, so you can see that the way that it's laid out is that you're going to have your first color in number 1. Both of your number 2s are going to be the same color, which on here is our background fabric. So whatever you're using for your background is going to be in both of the number 2 spots. And then number 3, the 2 number 3s are going to start your colors, whatever it is that you are using for your colors. And you'll use the same color on either side, which is why they are putting the number the same there. And then you just move, you know, in order of the numbers, you're going to just follow along. So you'll have 2 number 4s, 2 number 5s, 2 number 6, and so on. So I am going to cut my first color, and I'll head over to the sewing machine and meet you there. Okay, so I'm here and ready to sew on piece number 1 and piece number 2. So piece number 1 is going to be the white that we have right in the center, and this way is right side toward me. And since this is the first piece, I'm going to turn that so that the pretty side is facing away from me, and then I'm going to move that to the back of the template and sew on my number 2 pieces. And since they're still close together right now, I'm going to do them one at a time. But as we move out, we'll be able to start sewing on both pieces before we head over to trim and press. Okay, so I'm going to move this to the back of the template. I'm going to turn number 2 to the top, or one of the number 2s. Then I'm going to take my fabric, pretty side toward me. I'm going to move it straight to the back of the template and put it at least 1/8 of an inch above the line right here that we are going to sew between number 1 and number 2. Okay, here we go. Again, my stitch length is 1.2 millimeters, and it's very small, so you don't have to worry about your stitches coming out. You do not have to backstitch, but you can if you'd like, or if your machine already does it for you automatically. Okay, so here's the piece I just sewed on. If we flip that over, we can see this is the line that I just sewed. I should probably change to a different color thread so you guys can see it, but I'm going to turn number 2 to the right side of that seam allowance line that we just sewed, and I'm going to fold the paper back on that line. I'll take my add an 1/8 ruler and trim. And now I'm going to press this back. I'll probably give it like a little touch of that magic juice so that it lays nice and flat. And I'm headed over to the sewing machine to add the second piece number 2. Okay, so my piece that I added, my first number 2, has now been pressed, and I'm ready to add the second number 2. Now, you will notice that when you're adding these first 2 pieces, the 2 number 2s, it can get a little fiddly, like whenever you're trying to do your pressing, because you've sewn this tiny little line, right? But once we get the 2 number 3s on, everything will be much more stable and it'll be fine. So you just have to kind of work with it a little bit for these first 2 pieces, and then we'll be pretty much smooth sailing after that. Okay. So the second number 2, I'm going to turn to the top. I'm going to take my piece of fabric, pretty side toward me, and I'm going to slide it right to the back of the template. And I just want to make sure it's at least 1/8 of an inch above the line that I'm going to sew, which is this line right here between number 1 and number 2 on the other side. And here we go. Okay, so we've just added that piece, which is the second number 2. Now you may have to kind of look at it, and I'm like, okay, that's the one I just sewed, which is that one. So I'm going to make sure that that number 2 is to the right side of the seam allowance. I'm going to fold it back on that seam allowance that we just sewed, and use my add an 1/8 ruler to trim. And now I'm ready to press. Okay, so the first 2 pieces are added on, and now I'm ready to add my 2 color pieces, which are going to be 2 number 3s. And I'm just going to cut a couple of pieces of the fabric. And I'm still just going around using the fabrics in the bundle in the order in which they are. So I'm just going to continue that. So I'm going to take my first number 3 piece. I'm going to turn it to the top. I'm going to hold my fabric pretty side toward me, slide it behind the template, make sure it's at least 1/8 of an inch above the line that I'm going to sew for the seam allowance. Go up. And scooch that a little bit to the left. And that looks good. Okay, so I'm sewing this line, which is between the 1 and 2 blocks and the 3 block. So this line right here. Okay, so here's the piece that I just added on, which is this number 3. I'm going to turn it to the right. Nope, that's not the one I just added on, because there's the only line that I sewed. Okay, so I'm going to turn the number 3 to the right side of that seam allowance line. I'm going to fold the paper back. and trim the excess. And now I'm going to go and press that. Okay, so my first number 3 piece is added. I'm ready to add the second number 3 piece. So I'm going to take my fabric pretty side toward me. I'm going to slide it to the back of the template and make sure that the fabric is hanging down and the top of the fabric is at least 1/8 of an inch above this line, which is the one that I'm about to sew on. And you can hold it up to a light, which is very helpful. All right, that looks good right there. And here we go. Okay, so the second number 3 is added, and I can see that that's the line right there. All right, so I'm going to make sure, yep, that's right, that the number 3 piece is to the right side of that line that I just sewed on for my seam allowance. And I'm going to trim it. And I'm ready to go and press that. But here's what I'm going to do, which I think is going to be very helpful for us. I am going to mark the pattern with which number 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way around I'm going to attach first, so that I know which line is the one that I'm sewing on at that time. So I'm going to put a number 1 right there, and then I know that this is the first one all the way down. I don't have to write a 1. I mean, if you can, if you want to, but you really don't have to. As long as you know that this is going to be the first side, this side is going to be the first number 4, and then this is going to be the number 2, number 4, then we know exactly which one we're going to be trimming at the time. And I'm going to do the same thing up here, where I'm going to put a number 1 on this side and then a number 2 on this side. And so it'll go down that way, across that way, and so on. And I think that'll be very helpful moving forward. So let's do... Oh, and make sure this is a regular pin. This is not a friction pin. If you use a friction pin, every time you press, you're gonna lose all these numbers because the heat makes the ink disappear. So make sure you're using a regular pen or a colored pencil, something like that. Okay, so now I'm ready to add, because we have our 2 number 3s. Now we're going to add our 2 number 4s, and I've marked this one with a 1, so I'm going to turn that one to the top. And our next colors are going to be your background. So I'm going to cut a couple of those, and let's see, I can probably use this guy. I think, yeah, that'll be fine. I'll just go ahead and make sure I do it this way. So I'm going to take my fabric pretty side toward me. I'm going to move it to the back of the template and make sure it is at least, the top of the fabric is at least 1/8 of an inch above the line that I'm going to sew on. And looks good. And that probably could come up just a tad bit. Okay. So now this line right here is the one that we are going to sew. Okay, so this number 4 with the number 1 by it is the one that we just sewed on. So I'm going to turn that number 4 to the right. And now it is to the right side of the line we just sewed on. So I'm going to fold that back. And I'm going to trim. And now I am ready to press. Okay, so I've added the first number 4. Now the number 4, number 2 is going to go to the top. I'm going to take my fabric, pretty side toward me. I'm going to move it to the back of the template. Make sure that the top of that fabric is at least 1/8 of an inch above the line I'm going to sew. And let's see. I think I'm going to move that up a little bit. And check it out again. Okay, that looks good. So I am now sewing this line right here. Okay, the number 4 that is marked with a number 2 is to the right side of the line I just sewed on. I'm going to fold that back and trim. And now I'm going to go and press. Okay, so now we're ready for our next color pieces. So I'm going to cut a couple of pieces, and those are number 5s. We just put number 4 on, and I just want to make sure it's going to be long enough. Like I said, I always go like about 1/2 inch on either side just so that it's easier, and it's still not a very big piece of fabric, so you should be fine. And I just eyeball it. Okay, so I'll take the 5 piece marked with number 1. I'm going to move it to the top. I'm going to take my piece of fabric pretty side toward me, and I'm going to move it to the back of the template. And I'm going to make sure it is at least 1/8 of an inch above the line I'm sewing on. It does get easier as you have more fabric on here. Let's see. I can see what that is. That's pretty good. Okay. So this line right here is between number 3 and number 5 is the line I'm going to sew on. And actually this whole section, so this whole 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, so that line all the way across. Okay, so the number 5 piece that is labeled with number 1 is to the right side of the line that I just sewed for our seam allowance. I'm going to fold that back once again and use my add 1/8 ruler to trim the excess. And I'm going to press. Okay, so now we're going to add on our second number 5, which is marked with a 2. I'm going to turn that to the top, and I'm going to take my fabric, pretty side to me, move it to the back of the template, and make sure it's at least 1/8 of an inch above the line I'm going to sew on. And it is, so I'm going to sew that line right there. Okay, so number 5 with the 2 next to it is to the right side of the line that I just sewed on. So I'm going to fold this back. I'm going to trim. And now I am ready to press. Okay, so I have this done up to this point, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to sew off camera, and I will come back whenever I get to a point where I can add 2 pieces on at the same time, just to kind of show you the process that I use to do that. So I will be right back. Okay, so I'm at a point where I can add both pieces at the same time. So, well, not at the exact same time, but when I'm sewing. So this is my number 7 pieces. I've got 2 of them cut and ready to go. And I'm going to, and actually once you're sewing both of them on at the same time, you really don't need to pay attention to your 1 or 2 because it's really not going to matter anymore. So I'm going to take number 7, turn it to the top, fabric, pretty side toward me, slip it to the back of the template. And you want to make sure it's at least 1/8 of an inch above the line that we're going to sew on. Okay. I'll go ahead and sew that. Okay, and now I'm going to take the second number 7, I'm going to turn it to the top. I will take my piece of fabric, pretty side toward me, and I know, just to show you, that this line right here is the next line that I'm going to sew. And if I turn to the back and I see where that line, where that last piece of fabric was sewn down, and I know that my next line is going to be sewn, like, say here. And there's plenty of room above where this piece of fabric is. So I don't have to worry about sewing it down. So that's why I said it's okay for us to sew both pieces at the same time now. Okay, so now I'm going to move this to the back. And get it ready. Here we go. Okay, so here is my piece where I've sewed on 2 pieces at once on opposite sides. I'm going to flip it over, and the pieces I added on are the number 7s. So I'm just going to take the first one, flip my paper back, trim it, and then I'm going to turn it. So the second 7 is now on the right side of the seam allowance. Fold it back, trim, And now I can go and do my pressing, and then I'll be starting to add the next 2 pieces. So once I get this done, so that I am at the spot where those of you who are making a 4.5 inch unfinished block will be stopping, I'll come back and just let you know what you're going to do next. Okay, so I've reached the point where you would stop if you were making the 4.5 inch unfinished square. Okay, so if you look on the template, you'll see that you're going to stop, or your last pieces that you're going to add are going to be number 17 on either side and number 18 on either side. Once you have those put onto your template, then you want to go ahead and trim it at the light dotted line. So there was a darker dotted line that I sewed over here. And now on this lighter dotted line, you're going to leave the seam allowance there. So go ahead and trim around on that lighter dotted line, and your block is finished. So I'm going to continue, since I'm doing the entire 8 inch unfinished block, and when I come back, you will see the finished, well, my finished block.